The vampire king posted a bounty, any caretaker who could calm his inconsolable son for one night. But they all failed, fleeing his tantrums and unnatural strength. Only then did a blind orphan named Celeste arrive, singing a forgotten lullaby that made the boy weep and sleep. The cost: the vampire king would never let her leave his castle alive. Lucian stood at the window of his throne room as the sun bled into the horizon, watching the 17th nanny flee his castle gates with her skirts hiked up around her knees as she ran toward the mortal village below. The glass before him reflected nothing back. No face, no form, only the empty throne room behind him and the darkening sky ahead. Vampires cast no reflections, but he felt the weight of his own absence pressing against his chest like a stone. 43 days since the boy had last slept through the night. 43 nights of screaming that echoed through corridors built to withstand sieges, but never designed to contain the grief of a child. His son was dying from the inside out, the human half of him consuming itself in an agony no healer could name and no medicine could touch. The memory came unbidden, as it always did in these twilight hours, the night Isadora had died with her hand going cold in his, while the midwife placed a screaming infant in his arms. Blood had been everywhere, on the sheets, on his hands, pooling on the floor in dark roses that smelled of iron and the lavender oil she had loved. His first thought had been sharp and clear. I should have turned her. His second thought, arriving like a blade between his ribs, she would never have forgiven me. She had made him promise, made him swear on everything he had loved in his mortal life and everything he had built in his immortal one, that he would let her choose her own end. And she had chosen their son over eternity, chosen to give him her mortality, her humanity, her capacity for warmth in a world of cold stone and colder blood. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Gregor entered without knocking as he always did, his footsteps measured and familiar, a sound Lucian had known for 4 centuries. The vampire was old even by their standards, his face lined with the memory of expressions long abandoned. And he had known Lucien when Lucien had still drawn breath and felt the sun without flinching. "The bounty stands at 500 gold now, my lord," Gregor said, his voice carrying neither hope nor despair, only the flat reporting of facts. "Word has spread to 3 kingdoms. Merchants are talking, the desperate are starting to arrive." Lucien's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath skin that had not aged in 400 years. "Double it," he said. "Someone, somewhere, must know how to reach him." There was a pause, the kind that preceded words no advisor wanted to speak, and then Gregor said quietly, "Perhaps it is time to consider that the boy may not survive this grief." The words had barely left his mouth when Lucian's hand closed around his throat, fingers pressing into the windpipe with enough force to crack mortar. "Say that again," Lucian whispered, his voice dropping to the register that made grown vampires step back and mortal men fall to their knees. "I dare you." He held Gregor there for 3 seconds, 4, 5, then released him with a shove that sent the older vampire stumbling backward. Gregor coughed, one hand massaging his throat, and said hoarsely, "Forgive me." But they both knew the truth that hung between them like smoke. Halfling children were fragile in ways that defied their supernatural heritage, caught between 2 worlds and belonging fully to neither. Without sleep, without peace, Aster's human half would eventually burn itself out like a candle left too long in the wind. From the east wing came the sound that had become the castle's constant companion, the crying that started high and desperate before descending into something that sounded less like a child and more like a creature in a trap. It had been going for 3 hours this time, the servants had reported, 3 hours of wailing that made the stones themselves seem to weep. Lucien's face remained impassive, carved from the same pale marble as the statues in the great hall, but his hands shook. He clenched them into fists, pressed them against his thighs, willed them to stillness. The boy had Isadora's eyes, the same storm gray that could shift to blue in certain light, the same thick lashes that had made her look perpetually surprised when she laughed. I cannot watch them close forever, Lucien thought, the words forming in his mind with the weight of a vow and the helplessness of a prayer. He dismissed Gregor with a gesture and walked the long corridors to his private chambers, each step echoing in the emptiness. The castle had always been vast, designed to house a court of hundreds, but now it felt like a mausoleum, every room a tomb for memories he could not bury. He opened the door to the room he had shared with Isadora, the room he had not slept in since the night she died, and stood before the wardrobe where her wedding gown still hung. The silk was white, or had been, now yellowed slightly with time, and the particular stillness of things no longer worn. He reached out and touched it, felt the fabric slide cool and lifeless against his fingertips. "I don't know how to do this without you," he said aloud to the empty room, his voice cracking on the last word. The fabric was cold beneath his fingers. Cold as everything in this place had become, cold as the blood that no longer moved through his veins, cold as the future stretching endlessly ahead without her warmth to light it. Celeste woke in the orphanage dormitory, as she did every morning, counting the breathing patterns around her before she opened her eyes. 17 girls, all asleep, their breaths rising and falling in the particular rhythms she had memorized over years of listening. Anna breathed through her mouth, a wet sound that spoke of perpetual colds. Marie sighed in her sleep. Little Ruth whimpered sometimes, chasing nightmares Celeste could only imagine. She rose from her cot, bare feet finding the cold floor, and began the navigation she had perfected through repetition and necessity. 3 steps forward to avoid Anna's bed, which jutted out further than the others. 5 more steps to the doorway. Turn left. The floorboards announced her passage with their familiar creaks and groans, a language she had learned to read as clearly as others read words on a page. She didn't mind the noise. She liked to know where she was, liked the confirmation that her mental map matched the physical reality around her. She descended to the kitchen with one hand trailing the banister, counting the steps under her breath. 14 to the landing. Turn. 16 more to the ground floor. The kitchen was her domain in these early hours, the place where her hands knew every surface and her ears catalogued every sound. She pumped water from the well in the corner, the squeak of the handle telling her it needed oil again, and filled the kettle by weight, and the sound of water rising against metal. She built the fire by touch, arranging kindling in the pattern Sister Hilda had taught her when she was 8, striking the flint until she smelled smoke and heard the first eager crackle of flames catching. Her hands knew this kitchen better than her own face, better than the contours of her mother's silk scarf or the smooth worn surface of her wooden comb. Sister Hilda entered with her heavy footsteps and the scent of lavender soap she made herself from the garden herbs. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, though it was not really a question. Celeste smiled without turning from the fire. "The mice in the walls were gossiping," she said. "Very distracting." Hilda chuckled, a sound like water over stones, tired but genuine. This was their pattern, their morning ritual. Celeste's gentle humor meeting Hilda's exhaustion in a dance they had perfected over years. The orphanage housed 23 children now, too many for the space and far too many for the funds. The roof leaked in the east dormitory. The winter stores were already running low, though spring was months away. Celeste contributed by taking on extra work, laundry and mending and childcare, anything to ease the burden on the sisters who had taken her in when her mother died. She was the oldest at 19, never adopted, never wanted. "Too much of a burden," she had overheard a prospective family say once, their voices carrying through the thin walls of Sister Hilda's office. "Who wants a blind girl when there are so many healthy children to choose from?" She had not cried then, and she did not let herself think of it now. After breakfast, the younger children clustered around her as she folded linens, their small hands tugging at her skirts, their voices rising in a chorus of demands. Tell us a story, Celeste. Please, tell us about the queen. She obliged because she always did, settling onto the floor with a basket of mending in her lap, and the children arranged around her like petals on a flower. She told them about a queen who could sing storms to sleep, who had a voice so beautiful that thunder would quiet and lightning would dim just to hear her. Did you make that up? Thomas asked, his 6-year-old voice bright with wonder. My mother told it to me, Celeste said, her fingers working the needle through torn fabric without needing to see the stitches. She said every song has a history, every melody carries the memory of the person who sang it first. Her mother Elena had been a traveling singer who settled at the orphanage when fever took her voice and left her with nothing but memories and a daughter to raise. She had died when Celeste was 7, but first she had taught her daughter every song she knew, pouring them into Celeste's memory like water into a vessel. Music is sight without eyes, Elena had whispered in those final days when the fever made her shake and her words came slow. Love without touch. Carry it always. Sister Hilda gathered everyone after breakfast, her footsteps heavier than usual, and announced that the Vampire King had posted a bounty. 1,000 gold crowns for anyone who could calm his son for a single night. Enough to rebuild the orphanage, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Enough to feed us for 2 years. But he is impossible to please, she added quickly. And vampires don't let mortals leave easily. The older girls reacted with fear and disgust, their voices rising in protest. We would rather starve. Let someone else go. But Hilda's silence was louder than their protests, and Celeste heard it clearly, the way her breathing shallowed when she mentioned the leaking roof, the hesitation before she served half portions at meals. Celeste spoke up before she could talk herself out of it. I will go. The uproar was immediate. You can't. He'll kill you. You're blind. She waited for the noise to die down, standing with her hands folded and her face turned toward where she knew Sister Hilda was standing. Children are children, she said quietly, whatever their blood. If his son is suffering, perhaps he just needs someone who listens. Hilda protested, but they both knew there was no choice. Not really, not with winter coming, and the roof collapsing, and the children growing thinner by the day. Celeste went to her small cot and packed her belongings into a cloth sack. Her mother's silk scarf worn thin and soft with age, a wooden comb carved with roses that was her only possession of any value, a small icon of Saint Maron, the patron of orphans. That was everything she owned in the world. Thomas found her as she was tying the sack closed, his small arms wrapping around her legs. Will you come back? He asked, his voice muffled against her skirt. Celeste knelt and touched his face, memorizing the feel of his round cheeks and the way his hair stuck up in the back no matter how often Sister Hilda smoothed it down. I promise to try, she said. She did not promise to succeed because she had learned early that promises you could not keep were worse than no promises at all. The hired cart came at noon, and she climbed up beside the driver who smelled of horses and old leather. She could not see the orphanage disappear behind her, but she heard the children's voices fade, growing smaller and smaller, until only one remained, still singing the song she had taught them that morning. She hummed along, memorizing the sound of home, knowing she might never hear it again. The cart driver refused to cross the gates of Blackthorn Castle, pulling the horses to a stop while they were still 50 paces from the entrance. This is as far as I go, he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been pity or might have been relief. No mortal with sense goes further. He helped her down, his hands rough but not unkind, and described the path ahead. 50 paces straight, he said. Then you'll hit the doors, probably. The cart pulled away quickly, the sound of wheels and hooves receding faster than seemed strictly necessary. Celeste stood alone at the threshold. The silence here was different from any silence she had known before, thick and heavy, pressed against her eardrums like a physical weight. There were no birds singing, no wind moving through leaves, no distant sounds of village life. just stone breathing coldness, and the echo of her own heartbeat too loud in her ears. She took the 50 paces the driver had described, counting them carefully, her cane tapping against cobblestones that were smooth and ancient. Her cane found the steps and she climbed them, one hand on the wall for balance. The doors opened before she could knock, swinging inward on hinges that made no sound. "You're expected," said a male voice, aged and tired and carrying the particular flatness of someone who had spoken too many words over too many years. This was Gregor, though he did not introduce himself. "You're blind," he said, and it was not a question. "Yes," Celeste replied, lifting her chin slightly. "Does that disqualify me?" There was a pause and then something that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sigh. "We've tried 17 nannies with perfect vision," he said. "They all ran screaming. Perhaps blindness is an advantage." He led her through the castle, narrating out of courtesy as they walked. "Stairs ahead, 15 of them. Portraits on your left, Queens of Blackthorn, all dead now." Celeste traced the walls as they walked, building a map in her mind, noting distances and turns and the way sound moved through different spaces. The castle felt empty despite its size, their footsteps echoing too long in corridors that should have been full of life. "How many people live here?" she asked. "Define live," Gregor said darkly. 30 vampires, 200 mortal servants, but no one lives, they just don't die." As they walked, he told her what she needed to know. The queen had died 6 months ago in childbirth. The prince had been inconsolable since, refusing comfort, refusing food, screaming until his voice broke, and then screaming still. The king had withdrawn into duty and rage, executing 2 servants who had let the boy hurt himself and exiling another who had suggested sending the child away. The castle was a mausoleum of grief, Gregor said, and she was walking into its heart. They passed servants in the hallways, and Celeste heard them flatten against the walls, heard the quick intake of breath and the rustle of fabric as they bowed low. "Why are they afraid?" she asked. "Because the king is unpredictable now," Gregor said, "and because you're walking toward something that has broken everyone before you." The temperature dropped as they approached the nursery wing, cold enough that Celeste shivered despite her cloak. Then she heard it, the sound that had haunted 17 nannies into flight. A child crying, but not the way children usually cried. This was deeper, more primal, a soul-deep wail of abandonment that made something in her chest twist tight. "How long has he been crying?" she asked. 3 hours this time, Gregor said. "It comes in waves." He stopped at a door, iron-bound oak that felt heavy even from several paces away. "The king will come if you succeed," Gregor said. "If you fail, he'll send you away at dawn with your payment. No harm will come to you." Celeste heard the unspoken corollary. "Unless you hurt the boy, and then no amount of gold will protect you." "What's his name?" she asked. Gregor sounded surprised. "Aster. His mother's name. Isadora." "Thank you," Celeste said, and Gregor made a sound that might have been confusion, but he opened the door without asking why she was thanking him. The nursery smelled of destruction and grief, overturned furniture and torn fabric and something else, something sharp and bitter that might have been fear. The crying came from the corner, from behind what her cane identified as an overturned toy box. She did not approach immediately. Instead, she sat down on the floor near the door, her back against the wall, and waited. The crying continued, ragged and exhausted. She began to hum, not the lullaby yet, just a gentle tune that her mother had used to hum while working. A signal that said, "I'm here, I'm not afraid, I'm listening." 5 minutes passed. 10. The crying softened to hiccuping sobs, then a small voice, hostile and broken. "Go away." Celeste smiled into the darkness. "I can't," she said. "I'm blind. I'd get lost." Silence stretched between them like a string pulled tight. "You can't see me?" the voice asked, and there was something new in it now, something that might have been curiosity. No, Celeste said, but I can hear you breathing. You're about 5 paces away, in the northwest corner, behind what feels like an overturned toy box. A shuffle of movement. You're not scared? He asked. Of what? Celeste said gently. A little boy who misses his mother. The words landed like lightning in still air. Silence. Then a tiny broken whisper. She's gone. I know, Celeste said, her voice infinitely gentle. Mine too. Something broke in the corner and Aster began to cry again, but differently now, not rage but pure grief. Celeste started to sing, the lullaby her mother had taught her, the one Elena had said was older than kingdoms. Hush now. The stars are keeping. Watch while the world is sleeping. Moon's arms will hold you tender, until the dawns surrender. Aster went rigid and tried to speak but couldn't finish. Celeste kept singing, and slowly, so slowly, she heard his small feet on the floor, felt him approach, and then climb into her lap, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Mama sang that, he whispered. Celeste's throat tightened, but she kept singing. My mama sang it too, she whispered between verses. She wrapped him in her shawl because he was so cold, colder than any human child should be, his vampire half making his skin feel like marble. She rocked him gently and continued the song, and felt his breathing slow, deepen, finally settle into the rhythm of sleep. By the third verse, he was unconscious, his small body heavy with exhaustion. Celeste didn't stop singing even after he slept. She held this broken child and poured every ounce of love her mother had given her into the melody, tears sliding down her own face and into his dark hair. This is why I came, she thought. Not for gold, for this. The door opened and she felt it rather than heard it, a change in air pressure and temperature that told her someone was watching. She didn't stop singing, didn't turn her head toward the door because it wouldn't have mattered if she had. She finished the lullaby and then hummed it again, softer now, a promise of continued presence. Where did you learn that song? A voice asked, low and shattered, and carrying the weight of centuries. My mother, Celeste said, still holding Aster. She said it was older than kingdoms. Silence stretched, and she felt the presence in the doorway like a physical thing, cold and ancient and utterly still. His mother sang it too, the voice finally said. I know, Celeste replied, turning her face toward where the voice had come from. He told me. More silence and then footsteps retreating, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt final. She was alone with the sleeping prince, and she didn't know that the vampire king stayed outside that door for an hour afterward, listening to her hum and learning, slowly and painfully, how to breathe again. Lucien had not slept, though vampires did not need sleep the way mortals did. He had once rested beside Isadora in those quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when even the immortal could pretend at peace. He spent the night pacing the corridor outside the nursery, his footsteps silent on stone floors that had witnessed 4 centuries of his existence. Every hour he checked, opening the door just enough to see inside, and every hour the blind girl still held Aster, her back against the wall, humming softly even in her half-sleep. The boy did not wake once, his small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of true rest, something Lucien had not seen in 6 months. Dawn arrived with its particular quality of light that vampires could sense even through closed curtains, a warming of the air that spoke of sun touching stone. Lucien entered the nursery silently, his movements carrying the predatory grace that came with his nature. Celeste was asleep sitting up, her head tilted back against the wall, her scarred hands still curved protectively around Aster, who was curled in her lap like a cat seeking warmth. Both were breathing steadily, their rhythms almost synchronized. The room was still destroyed, furniture overturned and curtains torn and toys scattered like the debris of battle. But somehow it felt different now, less like a battlefield, and more like a space where something had been survived and overcome. Lucien stood watching them, and something in his chest that had been frozen for half a year cracked with an almost audible sound. This mortal girl with her scarred hands and tangled dark hair, cradling his son like he was something precious and breakable, like he mattered more than gold or safety or her own comfort. Isadora would have looked like this, he thought, the words cutting through him like glass. Should have looked like this, rocking their son to sleep in the quiet hours, singing the old songs, building the small, tender moments that make a childhood. Celeste woke not with a start, but gradually, her face turning toward him with the uncanny accuracy of someone who navigated by senses he barely understood. "You're here," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "How did you know?" Lucien asked, genuinely curious. "You're colder than the room," she said, "and you don't breathe." "Fair observation," he conceded. "What's your name?" "Celeste," she said, and he tested the name in his mind. Celestial, he thought, fitting for someone who sings like heaven, though he did not say this aloud. Astor stirred and woke, his gray eyes opening to see his father standing in the doorway. For the first time in months, he did not scream or cry or hide his face. He burrowed into Celeste's shoulder shyly and said in a small voice, "Papa, this is Celeste. She knows Mama's song." Lucien's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath skin that had not aged since before this child's grandmother was born. "I heard," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. They needed to discuss terms and conditions, the practical matters that would determine whether this miraculous night was an anomaly or the beginning of something sustainable. Lucien explained the situation carefully. She had succeeded where 17 others had failed. The bounty was hers, 1,000 gold crowns to do with as she pleased. "I'd like it sent to St. Marin's orphanage in Lower Draymore," Celeste said without hesitation. Lucien felt surprise flicker through him. "You don't want it for yourself?" he asked. "I have what I need," she said, gesturing to Astor, who was still clinging to her shoulder. "He's sleeping. That's payment enough." Lucien made his counteroffer, the words coming out more brusque than he intended, because he was unaccustomed to negotiating from a position of need. "Stay for a week, 200 gold per day. At the end, you're free to leave with full payment and safe passage." Celeste hesitated, and he could see her weighing the offer, calculating something he could not read. "Why?" she asked. "Because one night isn't enough," Lucien said. "He needs consistency." What he did not say, but knew she could hear anyway. "I need to understand how you did this, what magic you wield that 17 trained caretakers could not match." Celeste negotiated, and it was the first sign of the spine that ran through her like steel through silk. "I'll stay a week," she said, "but I need autonomy. I decide his schedule, his activities, his care. You don't interfere unless I request it." Lucien bristled because no one had dictated terms to him in centuries because he was king, and this was his castle and his son. But Astor was clinging to this girl like she was air itself, and he could not deny the evidence of his own eyes. "Agreed," he said, the word tasting strange in his mouth. Gregor arranged her room with the efficiency of someone who had been managing households since before the current kingdom existed. Adjacent to the nursery, modest but comfortable, with thick rugs to muffle sound and heavy curtains to block the sun that she could not see but might feel as warmth on her skin. Servants delivered breakfast, and Celeste ate with Astor, coaxing him to try porridge with a patience that made Lucien's chest ache. She talked to Astor like he was intelligent and capable, not a baby to be managed or a problem to be solved. "Can you describe this to me?" she asked, holding up a spoonful of porridge. "I've never seen porridge." Astor was delighted to be useful, his small face lighting up with purpose. "It's gray," he said thoughtfully, "and lumpy, like mud, but you can eat it." Not the most appetizing description, but Celeste laughed and tried it anyway. and Lucien watched from the doorway, unable to look away. Celeste proposed a schedule and explained it to Gregor with the authority of someone who had studied childhood development, though Lucien suspected her knowledge came from experience rather than books. Breakfast, lessons that included stories and numbers, garden time, lunch, quiet play, dinner, bath, and bedtime song. Structure helps grief, she explained. He needs to know what comes next, needs to feel that the world has order even when his heart is chaos. Gregor was skeptical, his ancient face showing doubt. The king doesn't follow schedules, he said. Celeste's response was immediate. The king isn't 5 years old. Lucien, listening from the next room, felt something that might have been amusement or might have been offense. He could not quite tell. The first garden walk happened at mid-morning when the sun was high, but the vampire roses still held their night-blooming scent. Celeste held Aster's hand and let him guide her, reversing the expected dynamic. "Tell me what you see," she said. Aster described everything with the earnest detail of a child given important work. Roses in red and white and black. The vampire roses that bloomed at night and smelled like cold stone and old magic. Fountains carved from marble with faces of forgotten queens. Paths made of gravel that crunched under their feet and tapped rhythmically under her cane. She mapped it all in her mind, building a picture from sound and texture and the cadence of his voice. They sat by a fountain, and Aster asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. "Why can't you see?" Celeste explained simply and without self-pity. "I was born this way. My eyes don't work, so my ears and hands work harder." Aster touched her face with curious fingers, tracing the shape of her closed eyelids. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never seen, so I don't know what I'm missing. Do you miss the color blue?" Aster paused, thinking. "No. Wait, that's smart." She smiled and he smiled back, and Lucien, watching from a tower window, felt something twist in his chest. Aster asked the question that mattered most, the one Lucien knew was coming. "Will you leave like the others?" Celeste's face showed the pain of it. The knowledge that honesty would hurt, but lies would hurt worse. "Not for a week," she said. "I promised." "But after?" Aster pressed. "I have to go home eventually," Celeste said gently. "But I'll stay as long as you need me." It was not enough. They both knew it, but it was honest, and that mattered more than comfort. Lucien observed from his tower window, and Gregor joined him, the old vampire's footsteps silent, but his presence familiar. "She's remarkable," Gregor said. Lucien's response was sharp. "She's dangerous." "Dangerous," Gregor repeated, surprised. "She makes him hope," Lucien said. "What happens when she leaves?" "Perhaps she won't," Gregor offered. "Everyone leaves eventually," Lucien said, his voice flat and final. Gregor was quiet for a moment, and then said softly, "Isadora didn't want to." The conversation ended there because there was nothing more to say. 3 days passed, and Celeste settled into the rhythm of the castle like water finding its level. Aster was improving in ways that were measurable and obvious, eating more, laughing occasionally at her stories, sleeping through most nights with only minor waking. But the castle itself was still heavy with sorrow. The stones themselves seemed to remember grief and hold it close. Celeste noticed Lucien's patterns because she was trained to notice patterns, had survived by learning the rhythms of spaces and people. He visited the nursery 4 times daily, before dawn when the world was darkest, mid-morning when sun streamed through windows he avoided, twilight when shadows grew long, and midnight when the castle was silent. He never stayed long, never touched Aster, though she could hear the longing in his silences, the way his breathing changed when the boy laughed. He watched from doorways like a ghost in his own home, like a man afraid to step into the light. The confrontation came one evening after Aster was asleep, when Celeste exited the nursery and nearly collided with Lucien, who was standing in the hallway as he always did. "You're always here," she said, not accusatory, but observant. You're observant, he replied. You're his father, she said. Why do you stand in doorways instead of sitting with him? Lucian stiffened, his posture becoming rigid and defensive. This is not your concern. You hired me to care for him, Celeste said, her voice steady. His emotional well-being is exactly my concern. Lucian's walls went up immediately, the aristocratic coldness that came from centuries of command. I am the king of this realm. I don't explain myself to mortals. Celeste was unfazed, had grown up with nothing to lose and therefore had no fear of losing it. Fine, she said. Don't explain. But he asks about you. Why doesn't Papa play with me anymore? What should I tell him? It was a direct hit, and Lucien's composure cracked like ice under pressure. Tell him, he started, then stopped. Tell him I'm busy. That's a lie, Celeste said quietly, and he'll know it. She paused, let the silence stretch. He thinks you don't love him anymore. Lucien's rage surfaced like a creature breaking through water, sudden and shocking. He slammed a hand against the wall and cracks spiderwebbed through the stone, mortar crumbling to dust. I would burn this world for him, he said, his voice ragged and raw. But every time I look at him, I see her, and it... He stopped, unable to finish. It hurts, Celeste said gently, finishing for him. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Then Lucienne said barely audible, Yes. Celeste stepped closer, guided by the sound of his breathing. He has her eyes, doesn't he? She asked. How did you? Lucienne started. You said her name like a prayer, Celeste said. And he said she sang to him. I can hear grief, Your Majesty. It has a sound. Lucienne sank against the wall as though his strength had finally given out, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Celeste, guided by his breathing and the small sounds of fabric against stone, sat beside him on the floor. Tell me about her, she said. Why? Lucienne asked. Because someone should hear it, Celeste said. And I never met her, so I won't look at you with pity. Lucienne talked, halting at first like a man learning a forgotten language, then flooding like a dam breaking. Isadora was mortal, a traveling singer. He had met her in a village tavern, been captivated by her voice before he ever saw her face. Courted her for a year, revealing his nature slowly, expecting her to run. She knew what he was and chose him anyway. She wasn't afraid, he said, like you. Their wedding had been small, just Gregor and a few trusted servants. Her joy when she conceived had been incandescent. Her terror during pregnancy had been equally profound because halflings rarely survived birth, and she knew the statistics. She made me promise not to turn her, Lucian said, his voice breaking on the words. She wanted to give him mortal humanity, not vampire hunger. The birth had lasted 3 days, longer than any mortal should have to endure. She hemorrhaged, blood everywhere, the midwives helpless. She begged him not to turn her even then, even dying. Let me give him this gift, she had said. Let me choose. She died with Aster in her arms, singing that lullaby, her voice growing fainter with each note. Lucienne's last words to her, I don't know how to raise him alone. Her last words, you'll learn. You'll love him. That's enough. Silence followed the story, heavy and sacred. Celeste wiped her own tears, her hands moving to her face with the automatic gesture of someone accustomed to hiding emotion. She was brave, Celeste said. She was foolish, Lucian countered bitterly. If I'd turned her, she'd have resented you, Celeste interrupted. And herself. She chose her son's humanity over her own eternity. That's not foolish. That's love. Lucian looked at Celeste, really looked at her in a way he had not looked at anyone since Isadora died. This blind girl saw more than anyone in his court, saw through to the heart of things with a clarity that was almost painful. "Why are you here, Celeste?" he asked. "Because the orphanage needs money," she said. "No," Lucien pressed. "Why did you come? The others came for gold. You came for something else." Celeste's truth came slowly, carefully. "Because I know what it's like to grow up without a mother. And if I could give one child one night of peace, that felt like enough." "You're a fool," Lucien said, but his voice was rough with something that might have been respect or gratitude. "So I've been told," she said, smiling in the darkness. Lucien stood and offered her a hand up. A gesture of courtesy he had not extended to anyone in months. She took it, and her hand was warm in his, small and scarred and alive. He did not let go immediately, could not quite make himself break the contact. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." "Thank you for trusting me," she replied. He left then because staying felt dangerous, and Celeste stood in the corridor with her hand still warm from his touch, knowing she was in trouble of a kind she had not anticipated. "I can't care about them this much," she thought. "I have to leave in 4 days." Day 6 arrived, and Lucien realized with something like shock that he had not thought about Isadora with agony today. He had thought of her with warmth, with fondness, because Celeste had asked Aster to describe his mother and the boy had talked for an hour. "Mama had long hair like yours but brown. She smelled like roses. She called Papa my heart." Celeste had listened and smiled, and helped him remember without drowning in the pain of it. The council meeting that afternoon brought reality crashing back. Lord Valen, a vampire noble with ambitions that exceeded his position, raised concerns in that oily way that pretended at helpfulness while seeding doubt. "The mortal girl has been here 6 days," he said. "She has influence over the prince. This is dangerous. She's his caretaker," Lucien said flatly. Lady Seraphine, beautiful and cruel and still bitter that Lucien had rejected her advances decades ago, added her voice. "She's a mortal. Mortals are temporary. What happens when she leaves tomorrow? The boy will be devastated." Lucien realized with cold clarity that they were right, that he had been avoiding this truth. Aster was attached, and so, he admitted privately, was he. The castle felt lighter with her in it. Servants smiled more, music had returned to the hallways. Last night he had heard her singing while folding laundry, and 3 servants had joined in humming, their voices tentative but hopeful. He could not let her leave, but how to make her stay? Gold would not work. She had already proven that she did not want it for herself. Threats were beneath him and would destroy whatever fragile trust they had built. He needed a reason she would accept, a bargain that would serve both their needs. He summoned her that evening and waited in his study, the room that smelled of old books and candle wax and centuries of decisions made in darkness. "You wanted to see me," Celeste said when she arrived, guided by a servant who left quickly. "Your weekend's tomorrow," Lucien said. "Yes," Celeste agreed. "Aster has improved significantly. He's a strong child," she said. "He just needed someone to witness his grief." Lucien made his offer, the words coming carefully because he knew he was walking a knife's edge. "I'm proposing a new contract. 3 months. 1,000 gold per month sent to your orphanage. You'll have a permanent suite, staff at your disposal, full authority over Aster's upbringing. At the end of 3 months, you're free to leave." "Why 3 months?" Celeste asked, her voice carrying suspicion. "Because that's how long it will take to find a permanent caretaker who can replicate your methods," Lucien said. It was plausible, but she heard the lie underneath, the desperation he was trying to hide. "You don't intend to let me leave, do you?" she said. Lucien did not answer immediately, weighing honesty against strategy. "If you leave tomorrow, Aster will regress," he finally said. "You know this, so you're leveraging his well-being to keep me here." Her voice was sharp now, angry. "I'm offering you a fortune to do work you're already doing," Lucien said. "Most would jump at this." "I'm not most," Celeste said, standing. I came to help a child, not become a permanent fixture in a vampire's castle. Then you'll doom him, Lucian said, and knew it was a low blow even as the words left his mouth. That's not fair, Celeste said, her hands clenching. Life isn't fair, Lucian replied. He needs you. I need. He stopped because the admission was too raw, too revealing. I need you here, he said quietly, honestly. Celeste sat down slowly as though her legs had given out. Why? She asked. Because you brought light back, Lucian said. Because you see us, truly see us, despite being blind. Because when you sing, this place feels like a home instead of a tomb. Celeste's conflict was visible on her face, the war between duty and self-preservation. If I agree to 3 months, she said slowly, you have to promise me something. Name it, Lucienne said. At the end, if I choose to leave, you let me go, she said. No tricks, no traps, no contracts that bind me forever. My choice. Lucian hesitated because this was a risk, 3 months to make her want to stay, but if she still wanted to leave, could he honor that promise? He thought of Isadora saying, let her choose, thought of the principles he had claimed to hold even when they cost him everything. Your choice, he said. I swear it. Gregor produced a document. Standard employment not bloodbound, and Celeste signed with her thumbprint since she could not see to write her name. Lucian watched her hand shake slightly and knew she was afraid, but brave. So much like Isadora, it made his chest ache. Celeste returned to her room and told Aster she was staying. The boy's joy was incandescent, his small arms wrapping around her fiercely. You won't leave? He asked. Not for a while, she said, unable to promise forever. That night she lay awake wondering if she had made a terrible mistake, if 3 months would be long enough to break her heart, or just long enough to make leaving impossible. Lucian stood in Isadora's old room, untouched since her death, and spoke to her portrait hanging above the fireplace. I know what you'd say, he told the painted face, that I'm falling for another mortal. That I'm a fool. The painted eyes seemed to smile at him with the secret knowledge of the dead. But you'd like her, he said. She sings your song. He left the room and closed the door behind him, and for the first time it did not feel like sealing a crypt, but like closing a chapter, making space for something new to begin. Week 3 had passed, and Celeste had become part of the castle's rhythm in ways she had not anticipated, her presence woven into the daily fabric like thread through cloth. Aster thrived under her care in ways that were undeniable and measurable. He had gained weight, his cheeks filling out with the healthy roundness of childhood. He slept peacefully through the nights without screaming himself awake. He even played with other children now. The servants' kids carefully supervised in the garden, while Celeste listened to their laughter and felt something in her chest grow warm. The change was remarkable, and everyone in the castle could see it, from the lowest kitchen maid to Gregor himself, who had watched 4 centuries of royal children and never seen such a transformation. But the vampire court was seething beneath the surface calm, resentment bubbling like water about to boil. Lady Seraphine cornered Celeste in the library one afternoon, her footsteps silent, but her perfume announcing her arrival, blood and roses, and something sharper underneath. You think you're clever, don't you? She said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of social evisceration. Worming your way into the king's favor. Celeste kept her hands steady on the book she was holding, a volume of fairy tales she had asked Mira to read to Aster later. I'm caring for a child, she said calmly. Nothing more. Seraphine laughed and the sound was like glass breaking. Liar. I see the way he looks at you, the way you look at him. You're trying to replace the queen. Celeste felt something cold settle in her stomach, but kept her voice level. I could never replace her, she said, and I'm not trying to. Seraphine leaned close, and Celeste could smell blood and perfume stronger now, could feel the cold radiating from her undead flesh. "You're mortal," Seraphine whispered. "Fragile. Temporary. He'll tire of you, and when he does, there will be no one to protect you." It was a threat, clear and unmistakable, and Celeste forced herself not to flinch. "If that happens, I'll leave," she said. "I'm not here by force." Seraphine's laugh was softer now, more dangerous. "Aren't you?" she asked. "That contract binds you for 3 months. And after, do you really think he'll let you walk away? Lucien Dark doesn't let go of what he claims." Celeste's unease grew like a living thing in her chest, doubt seeping into spaces that had felt certain. She remembered his promise, "Your choice," spoken with what had seemed like sincerity. But how much did a vampire king's promise mean when weighed against 400 years of taking what he wanted and holding it forever? Lord Vallon approached later that same day with more subtlety, his manner friendly and concerned in a way that immediately made Celeste suspicious. He found her in the music room where she had been teaching Aster to recognize different instruments by sound. He offered friendship, warned her that the court was dangerous, that she had made herself vulnerable. "A mortal in a vampire court without allies rarely survives," he said, his voice smooth as oil on water. He offered to mentor her in court politics, to teach her how to navigate the treacherous currents of vampire society. "Why would you help me?" Celeste asked, turning her face toward him. Valen smiled, and she could hear it in his voice. "Because you have the king's ear," he said. "That makes you valuable." Celeste declined politely, instinct telling her that accepting Valen's help would be trading one danger for another, but the warning stuck with her. She was a pawn in games she did not understand, moved across a board she could not see by players whose rules were centuries old. She befriended Mira more deeply after that, the kitchen girl becoming her eyes and ears in the servant quarters, where gossip flowed more freely than wine. Mira was 16, cheerful despite a life of service, mortal and therefore someone Celeste could trust to tell her truth without layers of vampire politics obscuring it. Mira explained the court dynamics while they folded linens together, her young voice carrying knowledge beyond her years. Seraphine wanted to be Lucien's consort after Isadora died, Mira said. She thought she had a chance, being beautiful and vampire and everything Isadora wasn't. When he rejected her, she was furious. "Valen wants more power on the council, always has, always will. Gregor is loyal but old and tired, been serving the crown since before my grandmother's grandmother was born." "Most vampires here resent mortals," Mira added quietly. "They think we're cattle, food with delusions of personhood. You being trusted is weird, makes them nervous." Celeste asked about Isadora, and Mira's face lit up with the memory of someone she had clearly adored. "She was wonderful," Mira said. "She used to visit the kitchens, help cook even though she was queen. She learned all our names, asked about our families, made us feel like people instead of servants. When she died, it was like the sun went out." Celeste felt something twist in her chest. "Did the court accept her?" she asked. Mira's face fell, and even without seeing Celeste could hear the change in her voice. "No," Mira said. "They hated that the king chose a mortal. Some say they sabotaged her pregnancy, cursed her or poisoned her or something. But no one could prove it, and the king was so destroyed by grief he couldn't investigate properly." Paranoia set in then, cold and creeping. Celeste realized with sharp clarity that she was in danger, that if the court had resented Isadora, who was at least the queen and Lucien's chosen consort, they would resent her even more. She was not even his wife, just a servant with influence, a mortal who had somehow gained access to the king and his heir in ways that threatened the established order. She considered leaving early, breaking the contract, fleeing back to the orphanage before whatever plot was brewing could catch her in its net. But then she thought of Aster, his small hand in hers, his gray eyes that were learning to shine with joy again. "If I leave now, I prove them right," she thought, "that mortals are weak and unreliable, that we break our promises and abandon those who depend on us." That night she requested an audience with Lucien, her heart pounding as she was led to his private study. She was blunt because she had learned that dancing around truth with vampires only gave them more weapons. "Your court hates me," she said without preamble. "I've been threatened twice this week. If you want me to stay the full 3 months, I need protection." Lucien went very still in the way vampires did, utterly motionless in a manner no living thing could achieve. "Who threatened you?" he asked, and his voice was dangerously calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. She named Seraphine first, then reluctantly mentioned Valen's warnings, which were less direct, but no less concerning. Lucien's fury was immediate and controlled, channeled into action rather than rage. He summoned the court immediately, calling a midnight assembly in the throne room with a speed that suggested he had been waiting for an excuse to assert his authority. Celeste was made to stand beside the throne, a position of honor that made her simultaneously more visible and more vulnerable, every vampire eye in the room fixed on her blind face. Lucien addressed them with the voice he used for pronouncements, cold and absolute. "It has come to my attention that some of you have forgotten your place," he said. "Celeste is under my personal protection. Any who threaten her threaten the crown prince. The penalty is final death." Final death meant no resurrection, no return, true obliteration of the kind that made even ancient vampires flinch. Seraphine showed her defiance with the recklessness of someone who had lived too long and grown bored. "She's mortal, my lord," Seraphine said. "She doesn't belong here among our kind, doesn't understand our ways." Lucien cut her off with a gesture, his hand slicing through air like a blade. "I decide who belongs in my castle," he said. "You are here by my tolerance, Seraphine. Push me, and you'll discover how quickly that tolerance ends." The room went silent, the kind of silence that followed when power had been demonstrated, and everyone was recalculating their position relative to the throne. Point made and received. Gregor escorted Celeste back to her room afterward, his footsteps measured, and his breathing telling her he was thinking carefully about his words. "You've made a powerful enemy today," he said. "I didn't ask him to do that," Celeste replied. "No," Gregor agreed, "but he did it anyway. That should tell you something." "What?" Celeste asked. "That you matter to him," Gregor said, "more than is wise." Celeste sat in her room afterward, shaking with delayed fear and confusion. She had not wanted this, had not asked for power or attention or to become a piece in vampire politics. She had just wanted to help a child, to give one small boy some measure of peace and comfort. But now she was entangled in something far bigger than herself, caught in currents that could drown her without even noticing. She pulled out her mother's scarf, the silk worn thin and soft with years, and held it to her face, breathing in the faint scent that lingered. "Mama," she thought, "what have I gotten myself into?" The Blood Moon Festival approached with the inevitability of seasons changing, a vampire tradition marking the longest night of the year when vampire power reached its peak and the boundary between their world and the mortal realm grew thin. It was a celebration of their nature and their dominance, a night when the court gathered in full regalia to reaffirm their place in the order of things. Lucien was required to appear with his court, and tradition dictated that the crown prince be presented to the assembled nobility, that they see the heir and acknowledge his claim to future rule. The problem was that Astor was terrified of crowds, had been sheltered since Isidora's death, and presenting him to hundreds of vampires could undo months of careful progress. But Lucien had obligations that superseded Celeste's concerns about childhood trauma. "He must be seen," Lucien said when they discussed it. "They need to know the heir is strong, that he will be capable of rule when the time comes." Celeste objected in private, her voice sharp with protective fury. "He's 5, she said. "He's not ready for this kind of pressure." Lucien was frustrated, his patience worn thin by competing demands. "You don't understand our world," he said. "Weakness in an heir invites challenges. If they think Astor is too human, too fragile, They'll question his right to inherit. Some will plot to replace him with a full vampire, someone they consider more suitable. Celeste felt her anger rise. He is human, she said. Half of him anyway. That's not weakness, that's just what he is. They had their first real fight then, voices rising in Lucian's study while Gregor diplomatically left them alone. Lucian lost his temper in a way he rarely did, 400 years of control slipping. "You've been here a month," he said. "You don't know our politics, our dangers, the 1,000 ways this court could tear itself apart. I'm trying to protect him. By traumatizing him," Celeste shot back. "By parading him like a prize, like something to be displayed and judged. By ensuring no one tries to assassinate him," Lucian roared, and the word hung in the air like a blade. That stopped her. "Assassinate," she repeated, the word suddenly making everything more real and more terrible. Lucian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exhaustion she had never seen from him. "There are factions who believe a halfling shouldn't rule," he said more quietly. "Old vampires who think purity of blood matters, who see Aster as a corruption of the line. If they think he's vulnerable, if they believe he can be removed easily, they'll strike. I need them to see him strong, confident, with his father. I need them to understand that touching him means war." Celeste felt her anger drain away, replaced by fear and determination. "Then let me help," she said. "Let me prepare him. Give me 3 days." Lucien was skeptical, his face showing doubt. "What can you do in 3 days?" he asked. "Trust me," Celeste said, and held his gaze even though she could not see it, her face turned toward him with absolute certainty. She worked with Aster over the next 3 days, explaining the festival in terms a child could understand. "There will be lots of people," she said. "Loud music, bright lights you'll be able to see. It might feel scary, but I'll be with you and so will your papa." "Will you sing?" Aster asked. "If you need me to," Celeste promised. She taught him a grounding technique her mother had used when Celeste was frightened as a child. "If you get scared, find my hand," she said. "I'll squeeze 3 times, and that means you're safe." They practiced, Aster's small hand in hers, her 3 squeezes gentle and reassuring. Aster squeezed back 4 times. "What does that mean?" Celeste asked, smiling. "That means I love you," Aster said, and Celeste's heart melted like wax near flame. She also negotiated terms with Lucien, her voice firm despite her lack of leverage. "Aster will attend for 1 hour, not the full night," she said. "He'll enter with me at his side. If he's overwhelmed, we leave immediately. No questions asked. No argument." Lucien agreed reluctantly, understanding that her cooperation was necessary. Festival night arrived, and the great hall was transformed into something out of legend. Candles everywhere because vampires loved firelight that reminded them of their lost mortality. Musicians playing haunting melodies that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Nobles dressed in finery that spanned centuries of fashion. Celeste was dressed in a gown Lucian had provided, midnight blue silk that was simple but elegant, fitted to her form in ways her usual plain clothes were not. She felt exposed, vulnerable, aware of her body in a way she usually was not. Lucian saw her descend the stairs guided by a servant, and he froze mid-conversation with a council member, his words dying in his throat. She was lovely in a way that had nothing to do with Isadora's dramatic beauty, something quieter and more enduring, like a candle flame that burned steady through wind. Her hand trailed the banister, counting steps, her head held high despite not seeing the crowd that watched her. Brave, he thought. Always so brave. He approached and offered his arm, the gesture formal and courtly. "You look," he started, then found he could not finish the sentence. "I'll take that as a compliment," Celeste said with a small smile that made something in his chest tighten. Aster was between them, gripping both their hands, and they made a picture for the court to see: the vampire king, the mortal woman, and the halfling prince. a family portrait whether they intended it or not. Lucian gave his speech, standard royal rhetoric about strength and continuity and the eternal nature of their kind. Then he introduced Aster, and the boy was visibly nervous, his small hand squeezing Celeste's with more than 4 beats. The crowd applauded, the sound like thunder in the great hall, and Aster flinched. Celeste began to hum, barely audible beneath the noise, but he heard it. His shoulders relaxed fractionally, his breathing steadied. The crisis came midway through when Lord Theron, an elderly vampire bitter with centuries of resentment, raised his voice above the murmur of conversation. "The boy looks weak," he said. "How can he rule if he clings to a mortal nursemaid like an infant?" The crowd murmured, agreement and disagreement mixing. Lucian's jaw tightened, his hand moving toward his sword before he could stop himself. Before he could respond, Aster spoke up, his child's voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "She's not a nursemaid," Aster said. "She's my friend. And she's brave. She's not scared of anything." Celeste stepped forward then, addressing the crowd she could not see, speaking to air and stone, and the assembled judgment of beings who had lived longer than empires. "Prince Aster has faced more grief in 5 years than most face in lifetimes," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "He lost his mother. He's learning to live between 2 worlds, to honor both halves of who he is. That's not weakness. That's strength of a kind you've forgotten." Lucian added his voice, deadly and absolute. "My son is strong," he said, "and he's loved. If anyone questions that, they question me and my judgment." The room went silent again, that profound silence of power demonstrated and received. Point made and no one willing to challenge it further. They left early as planned. Aster exhausted but proud. "I did it, Celeste," he said, nearly bouncing with excitement despite his tiredness. "You were so brave," she said, hugging him. Lucian watched them, something shifting in his chest like tectonic plates moving beneath earth. They had done this together, presented a united front, protected his son as partners rather than king and servant. It felt right in a way he had not felt since Isadora died. That night, after Aster was asleep, Lucien found Celeste on a balcony, drawn there by instinct or habit or something he could not name. "Thank you," he said, "for defending him." She smiled, her face turned toward the stars she could not see. "He defended himself," she said. "I just backed him up." Silence stretched between them, comfortable and charged. Then Lucien spoke again, the words coming before he could stop them. "You're remarkable," he said. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "I'm just a blind girl from an orphanage," she said. "No," Lucien said, and his voice carried absolute conviction. "You're more than that. You always have been." They stood in the moonlight, close but not touching, the air between them humming with unspoken things. Neither moved, not yet, both aware that crossing that distance would change everything, and neither quite ready for that transformation. Celeste was in the library searching for children's stories, asking Mira to read titles for her so she could choose something appropriate for Aster's lessons. Mira was pulling books from shelves when she found a leather journal tucked behind a row of histories, hidden or forgotten. "This looks personal," Mira said, her voice uncertain. "Should I?" She trailed off. "Describe it," Celeste said. Mira turned it in her hands. Leather, worn, woman's handwriting. The first page says Isadora's Reflections. Celeste felt her breath catch, knew she should not read it, that it was private and sacred and belonged to a dead woman whose memory she was already haunting. But she also knew that understanding Isadora might help her understand Aster and Lucienne, might give her insight into the grief that shaped them. "Read it to me," she said, "just a few entries." The entries revealed a woman Celeste wished desperately she could have known, someone brave and scared and determined all at once. Isadora's early days at court were documented with painful honesty. "They hate me for being mortal," she had written, "but Lucian chose me. and I won't shame his choice by being weak. Her joy at her pregnancy was incandescent on the page. A child, half me, half him. A bridge between worlds. Her fears were equally vivid. What if I don't survive the birth? What if this child is rejected by both worlds and belongs to neither? There was an entry about the lullaby that made both Celeste and Mira cry. I sang the song Mama taught me, the Queen's Mercy. Lucien wept when he heard it. He said it was the most beautiful thing in this dark place. I'll teach it to our son. It will be his inheritance, mortal beauty preserved forever. Another entry revealed a connection that took Celeste's breath away. My mother was a healer in Lower Draymore decades ago, Isadora had written. She learned the song from another healer's daughter, Elena. Celeste's mother, the same Elena who had died when Celeste was 7, who had taught her daughter every song she knew before fever took her voice. We're connected, Celeste thought. Through mothers, through songs, through love passed down like heirlooms more precious than gold. The final entry was dated 3 days before Isadora died. If I die, I hope someone will care for my son the way I would have, she had written. Someone who will love him for both halves of who he is. Someone who will remind Lucien how to feel joy again. I'm not afraid of death. I'm only afraid of leaving them alone. Celeste was crying by the time Mira finished reading, tears sliding down her face unchecked. Mira was crying too, her voice thick with emotion. She knew, Celeste whispered. She knew she might not make it, and she still chose this. She loved them so much, Mira said. That evening, Celeste asked Gregor to bring Lucienne to the library, her hands shaking as she held the journal. When Lucienne arrived, she explained what she had found, her voice apologetic. I know I shouldn't have read it, she said, but I think you need to hear this. She asked Mira to read passages aloud, the girl's young voice carrying Isadora's words back into the world. Lucien listened with his face carved from stone, utterly still in that vampire way. But Celeste could hear his breathing change, could hear the small sounds of fabric shifting as his hands clenched. When Mira read the final entry, Isadora's hope that someone would care for Aster and love him and remind Lucien of joy, his composure shattered like glass under pressure. He took the diary from Mira's hands, read it himself, his hands shaking in a way Celeste had never heard from him. Silent tears slid down his face, blood-tinged the way vampire tears were, and he did not bother to hide them. He looked at Celeste, his voice raw. She would have liked you, he said, and it was the highest compliment he could give, the greatest honor. I wish I'd known her, Celeste said. She was everything good, Lucien said, and I killed her. Celeste was fierce in her response. No, she said, she chose this. She chose love and family and sacrifice. You honored her choice by letting her make it. Lucien's confession came like a dam breaking. I dream about her every day, he said. I hear her voice in the corridors, singing in the garden. And then I wake up and she's ash scattered in the rose garden and I'm still here. I thought I'd never feel anything again except this grief. But then you came and you sang her song and you... He stopped, unable to finish. Celeste's heart pounded so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. I what? She asked, needing to hear him say it. Lucien looked at her, truly looked, saw her not as Isadora's echo or replacement, but as herself, Celeste, unique and irreplaceable. You made me want to live again, he said, not just survive, not just exist through centuries. Live. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying, and more honest than either had been before. Celeste did not know what to say because she felt it too. This pull, this warmth growing in her chest, that had nothing to do with duty or contracts or obligation. But she was still mortal, still temporary, still the girl who had agreed to leave in 2 months when the contract ended. Lucien, she started, but he interrupted quickly. I know, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. He left then because staying felt too dangerous, the air between them too charged with possibility. Celeste stood alone in the library, her mother's scarf clutched in her hands, understanding settling into her bones with cold certainty. I'm falling in love with him, she thought, and that's going to break me. That night, Astor asked why she looked sad, his small face concerned. Just thinking about my mother, she lied, not ready to explain emotions she barely understood herself. He hugged her with the fierce affection of childhood. It's okay to be sad, he said. Celeste taught me that. She laughed through tears. You're very wise, she said. I learned from you, he replied. And she held him knowing her time here was finite. Knowing she was going to leave pieces of her heart scattered through this castle like seeds that would grow in her absence. 2 months had passed since Celeste arrived, and Astor was thriving in ways that seemed miraculous to everyone who had known him before. The transformation so complete that even the skeptical nobles had to acknowledge her success. The castle itself felt brighter somehow, as though her presence had brought warmth to stone that had been cold for 5 years. Lucian and Celeste had fallen into an easy partnership that felt natural as breathing, discussing Astor's education over breakfast, taking evening walks in the garden where she could smell the roses Isadora had planted, sharing quiet conversations about everything and nothing while the moon rose over the battlements. Lucien had not felt this content since Isadora died, and that terrified him more than any enemy he had faced in 4 centuries. This vulnerability that came with caring again, with allowing himself to hope for happiness. The attack came late one afternoon during lessons when Astor suddenly collapsed without warning, his small body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. His fever spiked instantly, his skin going gray in that terrible way that mixed vampire pallor with mortal illness, and then he began to convulse. Celeste screamed for help, her voice carrying through the corridors with raw panic. Lucien arrived within seconds, vampire speed bringing him from his study to the nursery before her cry had finished echoing. He scooped his son into his arms, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from small limbs. What happened? He demanded. I don't know, Celeste said, her voice breaking. He was fine and then he just collapsed. I don't know what's wrong. Healers arrived quickly, both vampire and mortal doctors summoned to examine the prince. They were baffled by what they found, agreement that it was not vampire sickness like blood poisoning or mortal illness like infection, but something else entirely, something their knowledge could not categorize. His hybrid nature made diagnosis nearly impossible, symptoms presenting in ways that fit neither species' medical understanding. Lucien was frantic in a way the castle had never seen, ordering every expert in 3 kingdoms summoned immediately, threatening death to anyone who delayed. Celeste stayed at Astor's bedside through it all, holding his small hand in both of hers, singing to him softly, even though he was barely conscious. It hurts, Celeste, he whimpered. I know, sweetheart, she said, her voice steady despite her terror. We're going to fix it. But she did not know if that was true, did not know if mortal determination could overcome whatever poison was burning through his veins. Gregor conducted his investigation with the thoroughness of someone who had survived 4 centuries by being careful and paranoid. He examined everything Astor had touched that day, every toy and book and piece of food, methodical and systematic. He found it in the evening milk Astor drank before lessons, the cup still sitting on the nursery table. Gregor tasted it himself, vampires being immune to most poisons, and identified silver dust mixed into the liquid. Silver was toxic to vampires, burning them from the inside, and potentially lethal to halflings whose dual nature made them vulnerable in ways pure vampires were not. Lucien demanded to know who had prepared the milk, and the servant was brought before him, Thomas the groundskeeper, who was mortal and had worked at the castle for years without incident. Thomas was terrified, shaking as he swore he did not know the milk was poisoned. Lady Seraphine gave me the milk, Thomas said, his voice breaking. She said it was a special blend for the prince's health. I didn't question her. She's nobility and I'm just a servant. Seraphine was arrested immediately, dragged from her chambers to the dungeons by guards who handled her without gentleness. She was defiant, even in chains, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. The boy is an abomination, she spat. Half-human filth. He doesn't deserve to rule our kind. Lucian's rage was apocalyptic, his eyes glowing red in a way they had not since the wars. Fangs fully extended, ancient power radiating off him in waves that made even veteran guards step back. You poisoned my son, he said, and each word was a death sentence. Seraphine laughed because she had nothing left to lose. And I'll do it again unless that mortal bitch leaves, she said. She's turned you soft. The court whispers you're abandoning vampire ways for mortal sentiment. I'm protecting our kind from your weakness. Lucian grabbed her throat, lifted her off the ground with one hand, his control fraying. My son is dying, he growled. Give me the antidote. Seraphine smiled even as she choked. There is one, she managed, but you'll never get it in time unless you make a bargain. The impossible choice crystallized in the dungeon air. Seraphine named her price with the cruelty of someone who understood exactly where to strike. The mortal leaves tonight and never returns. I'll give you the antidote. Lucian hesitated for the first time in decades, every instinct screaming to kill Seraphine immediately, but Aster's life hanging in the balance. Done, he started to say. Celeste was listening from the doorway where Gregor had brought her, so she would understand what was happening. Before Lucian could agree, she spoke, her voice cutting through his rage. I'll go, she said. Just save him. Lucian spun toward her voice. No, he said flatly. He's your son, Celeste said, and her voice broke on the words. I won't let him die for my pride. Please, just save him. Seraphine laughed, the sound echoing off stone walls. How touching, she said. The mortal martyr. She produced a vial from her cloak, moonflower extract mixed with her own blood. Give him this within the hour, she said. He'll recover. Lucien took the vial, his hand closing around it carefully, but his eyes promised Seraphine something terrible. You'll burn at dawn, he said. She shrugged with the indifference of someone who had lived too long and no longer cared. Worth it, she said. They administered the antidote immediately, Celeste holding Aster while a healer poured the liquid between his lips. Within minutes his fever broke. Within an hour his color returned from that terrible gray to something closer to healthy. He woke groggy and confused. Celeste, he mumbled. She was there, holding his hand. I'm here, she said. He slept again, this time peacefully, and the healers confirmed he would live. Celeste packed her small satchel in her room, everything she had come with fitting easily because she had arrived with almost nothing. Aster was asleep and would not wake to say goodbye, which was simultaneously mercy and cruelty. She kissed his forehead, whispered words he could not hear. Be brave, she said. Be strong. Your mama and papa both love you. She left a note for him dictated to Mira because she could not write it herself. You are loved, always. Lucien found her in the courtyard, ready to leave, a guard waiting to escort her. You're not going, he said. We made a deal, Celeste replied. Seraphine made a deal, Lucien said. I'm breaking it. Then Aster dies, Celeste said quietly. Seraphine will burn, Lucien said. The deal is void. Will it? Celeste asked. Can you guarantee there's no contingency, no second poison, no final cruelty waiting if I stay? The truth was that Lucian could not guarantee anything because vampire vengeance was elaborate and centuries-old grudges bred complex plans. Seraphine might have insurance, some mechanism to ensure her revenge even in death. Celeste saw the calculation in his face, the moment he realized she was right. Let me go, Lucien, she said, and her voice was gentle. I've done what I came to do. Aster is healing. You remember how to love him. That's enough. It's not enough, Lucian said, desperation bleeding through his control. I need. He stopped, would not finish the sentence. Celeste stepped closer, put her hand on his chest where a mortal heart would beat, felt nothing but cold, eternal presence. You need to let me go, she said. For Aster, for yourself. You can't keep holding on to mortals and watching them break. Lucien grabbed her hand, held it against his chest. I love you, he said. And there it was, finally spoken aloud. Celeste's face crumpled, her careful composure shattering. I love you too, she said. But that doesn't change what I am. It changes everything, Lucian said. No, she whispered. It just makes this harder. She pulled her hand away, turned toward the gate, her cane tapping against cobblestones. Lucian did not follow because he could not, bound by duty and Aster's safety, and centuries of cold pragmatism that told him her leaving was the logical choice. He watched her walk away, his fists clenched, her name dying on his lips before he could call her back. Celeste made it to the forest edge before she collapsed against a tree, sobs tearing from her throat. Behind her the castle stood cold and silent, the place she had learned to love, and the people who had become her family, now forever out of reach. She was free, and she had never felt more trapped. The forest at night was a nightmare for someone blind and alone. Celeste had her cane, her sense of direction built from years of navigating by sound and touch, and bone-deep exhaustion that made every step harder than the last. She stumbled through undergrowth, branches catching her dress and tearing the fabric, the cold biting through her cloak and settling into her bones. She did not know where she was going, only that it was away from the castle and the love that would destroy her if she let it. She reached a stream eventually, heard the water flowing over rocks, and knelt to drink. Her hands shook as she cupped water to her mouth, running on adrenaline and grief and the terrible knowledge that she had left pieces of herself behind. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze, panic spiking through exhaustion. Bandits roamed these woods, and vampires too, and she was utterly defenseless. She gripped her cane like a weapon, even though it was useless, the gesture purely for comfort. The horse stopped nearby, someone dismounting. A familiar voice called her name. Celeste. Lucian approached slowly, and she heard his footsteps, the careful way he moved like he was approaching something wild that might bolt. What are you doing here? She asked. Coming for you, he said. The deal, she started. I killed Seraphine, he interrupted. Burned her before dawn. The deal is void. Confusion washed over her. You, she started. But Aster. Gregor checked everything, Lucian said. There's no contingency. She acted alone out of spite. No backup plan, no poison waiting. Aster is safe. Relief nearly buckled her knees, but then anger surged to replace it. You let me think, she said. You let me leave. I didn't know, Lucian said, frustration in his voice. I thought she might have planned something else. But Gregor is thorough, spent hours investigating. There's nothing. So you hunted me down like a runaway servant, Celeste said bitterly. No, Lucian said, his voice rough. I came because I can't let you go. You don't get to decide that, Celeste said. I know, Lucian said quietly. That's why I'm asking. Come back, please. Celeste refused, shaking her head. I can't, she said. Every time I care about someone, they get hurt, or I lose them. My mother died. The orphanage children grew up and left. Now you and Aster. I'm tired of breaking Lucian. You're not breaking, he said. You're the strongest person I know. I'm a blind girl who barely survived tonight, she said. I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn. Lucian knelt in front of her and she heard his descent, felt his presence like cold pressing against her skin. I don't know how to do this, he said with painful honesty. I haven't courted anyone since Isadora. I'm cold and cruel and I've made every mistake a man can make. But I know one thing. I'm better with you. Aster is better. The whole damn castle is better. And if you stay, I swear I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice. Celeste's fear came out in a whisper. What if I'm not enough? She said. What if I can't replace her? I don't want you to replace her, Lucien said. I want you to be you. Isadora was my past. You're my… He hesitated, searching for words. I want you to be my future. It was clumsy and honest and raw. Everything polished vampire courtship was not. Let me make you immortal, he said. A blood bond. You'd age slowly, live centuries, stay with us. Celeste recoiled. No, she said immediately. Why? Lucien asked. Because that's not a choice, she said. That's a cage. You'd be binding me to you out of fear I'll die. Out of love, Lucien corrected. Love doesn't trap, Celeste said. It frees. They sat in the cold, two damaged people, trying to find a way forward through pain and fear and love that felt too big to contain. Finally, Celeste spoke. Ask me again, she said, when I'm not running on fear and grief, when I've had time to think. If you still want me, and I still want you, we'll talk about forever. But not tonight. When? Lucien asked. When my contract ends, she said. 1 month from now. If I choose to stay, then it's real. Not coerced, not circumstantial. Real. Lucien nodded slowly, understanding what she needed. 1 month, he agreed. But I'm not letting you leave now. It's not safe. I'll go back to the orphanage, Celeste said. Then I'll escort you, Lucien replied. They compromised, returning to the castle together with the understanding that she would stay in her room, care for Aster, but they would maintain distance. No declarations, no pressure. Just time to think and choose freely. As they rode back with Celeste sitting in front of Lucien on his horse and his arms around her to hold the reins, she leaned into his chest. He was cold, but she had never felt safer, his presence solid and eternal behind her. Neither spoke because words would ruin the fragile peace they had found. Dawn came and Seraphine burned, Lucien watching her turn to ash and feeling nothing but satisfaction at justice served. The court was assembled to witness, the lesson clear and brutal. Let this be a warning, Lucien said to the assembled nobles. The crown prince is under my protection, so is his caretaker. Any who threaten them will face the same fate. Lord Vallon pledged loyalty with the self-preservation of someone who knew when to bend, and the other nobles bowed. The message was received and understood. Lucien was not to be crossed. Aster woke weak but recovering, his first words asking for Celeste immediately. Lucien told him she was there, that she had come back. Aster's smile was radiant, joy lighting his small face. When Celeste arrived, he hugged her fiercely enough to hurt. I thought you left forever, he said. I thought so too, Celeste admitted. But your papa brought me home. The final month of the contract passed quietly, Celeste and Lucien maintaining careful distance that was friendly but nothing deeper, no intimacy beyond what duty required. It was torture for both of them, this dancing around each other, hyper-aware of every glance and word, aching with things unsaid. On the final day, Lucien summoned Celeste to the throne room, the setting formal with Gregor and the court present as witnesses. Your contract has ended, Lucien said from his throne. You're free to leave, Celeste of Lower Draymore. Celeste stood before him with her back straight and her voice clear. I have a question first, she said. Ask, Lucien replied. If I stay, am I choosing you or am I choosing Aster? She asked. Lucien understood immediately that she needed to know this was not just duty or obligation. Both, he said. I want you for both. I want you as Aster's mother, and as my partner, my consort, my love. The court gasped because consort was a formal title, equal to queen in all but name. Celeste's breath caught. "You're asking me to stay permanently," she said. "I'm asking you to choose us," Lucien said. "Freely. I'll still offer the blood bond, but only if you want it. If you don't, we'll make the most of your mortal years. If you do, we'll have centuries. Either way, I want you." Celeste had conditions because she would not be someone's possession. "I won't be a decorative consort," she said. "I want to work, improve mortal vampire relations, fund orphanages, reform the servant laws." Lucian was surprised, but did not hesitate. "Granted," he said. "I want autonomy," Celeste continued. "I make my own choices." "Always," Lucian agreed. "And I want honesty," she finished. "No more secrets, no more martyr acts. We do this together or not at all." Lucian stood, descended from the throne to stand before her as an equal. "Together," he said. "I swear it." He offered his hand and Celeste took it, their fingers intertwining. "Then yes," she said clearly for everyone to hear. "I choose you. I choose us." The hall erupted, applause from some like Gregor and the mortal servants, stony silence from others like Valen and the old guard who would never approve. But it did not matter, because Lucian pulled Celeste close and kissed her in front of everyone, a public claim and promise and beginning. Aster ran into the hall, interrupting with the perfect timing of childhood. "Does this mean Celeste is my mama now?" he asked. Celeste knelt to his level even though she could not see him. "Only if you want me to be," she said. "I do," Aster said, and hugged her. Over his head, Celeste and Lucian locked gazes, understanding passing between them. This was their family now, chosen and real and whole. That night, Lucian took Celeste to the tower balcony where they stood overlooking the kingdom, the night air cold but the stars bright above them. "No regrets?" he asked. "Not yet," she teased. And he laughed, a sound she had never heard from him before. It was beautiful, rich, and genuine, and alive in a way she had not thought possible from someone 4 centuries dead. She reached for his hand and he took it, intertwining their fingers. "I love you, Celeste," he said. "I love you, Lucien," she replied. And for the first time, neither was afraid to say it, to claim this love that had grown in darkness and grief, to build something new from the ashes of what came before. Months had passed since Celeste became royal consort, and the castle that once felt like a labyrinth of danger now felt like home in ways that still surprised her when she stopped to consider how far she had come from the orphanage in Lower Draymore. She had settled into her role with a determination that earned respect from even the most skeptical courtiers, those ancient vampires who had initially dismissed her as nothing more than a curiosity or a passing fancy for their king. The servant contracts had been her first major reform, negotiating better wages and establishing protection laws that prevented the casual cruelty she had witnessed in her early days at court, and though some nobles grumbled about the cost, they could not deny that happier servants meant a smoother household. The fund for orphanages across the kingdom had been her second triumph, established with money she insisted come from the royal treasury rather than charitable donations, because children should not have to rely on the whims of the generous when the state had resources to spare. The peace she had brokered between vampire and mortal districts had been the most delicate work, requiring months of careful negotiation and compromise. But now the two communities coexisted with something approaching mutual respect, rather than the simmering resentment that had defined their relationship for centuries. The court respected her now, some grudgingly because they had no choice when even Lucian deferred to her judgment on certain matters, some genuinely because they had watched her navigate impossible situations with grace and intelligence that belied her humble origins. Her relationship with Lucien had deepened in ways that transcended the initial passion that had brought them together, evolving into a partnership that encompassed every aspect of their lives. They were intellectual equals who debated policy and philosophy late into the night. Emotional confidants who shared their fears and hopes without reservation, romantic partners whose physical connection had only grown more intense with familiarity and trust. But there was one thing left unresolved between them, hanging in the air like smoke that neither acknowledged but both constantly thought about, and that was the blood bond. Lucian had not pressured her about it even once, seemingly content with her mortality and willing to accept whatever time they had together. But Celeste knew the truth that kept her awake some nights when she lay beside him and felt the slow, steady rhythm of her own aging. She was 20 now, healthy and strong, but she could feel time passing in ways she never had before, small changes in her body that reminded her she was mortal while he was eternal. If she lived a full mortal life, she would have maybe 60 years, perhaps 70 if she was exceptionally fortunate. But Lucian had already lived 400 years and would live 400 more unless something killed him. The disparity gnawed at her, not because she wanted immortality for its own sake, but because she wanted time with Aster, who was just beginning his life, with Lucian, who had given her love she never imagined possible, with the reforms and changes they were building together that would take generations to fully realize. She confided in Gregor one afternoon in the library where he was cataloging texts that predated most human civilizations, asking him what the blood bond was truly like because she trusted him to give her an honest answer rather than a romanticized version. Gregor had been bonded to his long-dead human husband centuries ago and rarely spoke of it, but he looked at her now with understanding that came from experience. "It is not full vampirism," he explained carefully. "You will still need food and sleep. Sunlight will not harm you, though it becomes uncomfortable after prolonged exposure. You can still have children if you wish, but you age 1 year for every 10 that pass. And you are tied to him in ways that transcend the physical. His emotions bleed into yours, and his life force sustains yours. It is intimate in ways that some find overwhelming." Celeste voiced her deepest fear, the one that had kept her from accepting despite her desire for more time. "That sounds like losing myself," she said. Gregor considered this for a long moment before responding. "Or finding a new self," he said. "It is not for everyone. Some mortals feel suffocated by the connection, unable to separate their own feelings from their vampires. But if you love him and he loves you, it is a gift. A way to walk together, instead of watching him walk alone for centuries while you crumble to dust. My husband and I had 60 years together because of the bond. Without it, we would have had perhaps 20 to... I have never regretted it, even though losing him nearly destroyed me." She asked Lucien directly that evening in their private chambers, needing to hear his truth without courtly politeness or careful evasion. "Do you want me to accept the bond?" she said. He was careful with his answer, too careful in a way that told her he had been thinking about this as much as she had. "I want whatever you want," he said. "That is not an answer," Celeste replied, and she heard him exhale in the darkness. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid, and then he spoke with painful honesty. "Yes," he said. "I am selfish enough to want you for centuries. I want to watch you grow into your power, see the changes you will make, grow old with you slowly instead of watching you age in what feels like seconds to me. But I am also terrified of trapping you. You gave up so much to be here. I will not ask you to give up your humanity too. So I will accept whatever you choose, and I will love you the same either way." Celeste revealed her fear then, the one that went deeper than simple hesitation. "I am afraid I will stop being me," she said. "That I will become some vampire-adjacent creature who is neither mortal nor immortal, stuck between worlds like Aster." Lucian took her hands in his, cold fingers wrapping around her warm ones. "Aster is not stuck," he said firmly. "He is both. Fully human and fully vampire in his own way. He has the best of both worlds and the wisdom to navigate them. You would be the same. Fully yourself, fully mine. The bond does not erase who you are. It amplifies it. The decision took a week of careful thought, of soul-searching that kept Celeste pacing her rooms at odd hours, when sleep would not come. She talked to Mira, who was horrified at the idea of her lady binding herself to a vampire for centuries, who worried that Celeste was giving up too much of herself for love. She talked to Aster, who was thrilled at the prospect of having her as his mother for his entire life, rather than losing her to age when he was still young. She wrote letters to the children at the orphanage asking for their thoughts, and they wrote back telling her to follow her heart because she had taught them that courage meant choosing love even when it was terrifying. Finally, she found Lucien in his study late one night and spoke before she could lose her nerve. "I will do it," she said. "Not because I'm afraid of dying or growing old, because I'm excited about living. With you, with Aster, with the future we are building. I choose this. I choose us." Lucien exhaled relief he did not know he was holding. 400 years of control cracking to show naked gratitude. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure," Celeste said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. He crossed to her then and pulled her into his arms, kissed her deep and grateful and reverent, in a way that made her knees weak. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" she asked. "For choosing me," he said, again. "For trusting me with this. For being brave enough to walk into forever." The blood bond was a sacred ritual performed under the new moon when vampire magic ran strongest, and the veil between life and death grew thin. Lucien explained the process to her in careful detail because he wanted her to understand fully what would happen to her body and mind. "I will give you my blood," he said. "You will drink, and it will change you slowly over weeks. You will feel stronger and sharper. Your senses will heighten beyond even what you have developed as a blind woman. You will feel my emotions as clearly as your own, and I will feel yours. We will be connected in ways that go beyond words or touch." The night of the ritual, Celeste was shaking, but not from fear, rather from anticipation that made her skin feel too tight and her breath come too fast. Lucien led her to a private chamber deep in the castle, one he admitted he had used once before centuries ago. "I bonded with Isadora here," he said quietly. "I have had it cleansed and blessed since. If you would prefer another location, we can go elsewhere." "No," Celeste said. "This is right. She is part of our story. It feels appropriate to honor that." Gregor officiated because vampire rites required a witness, someone to ensure the bond was formed correctly, and to intervene if something went wrong. They stood facing each other in the candlelit chamber, while Gregor spoke the old words in a language Celeste did not understand, but could feel the weight of. Lucien spoke his vows first, his voice steady, despite the emotion she could sense thrumming through him. "I vow to cherish you, protect you, walk beside you for as long as you will have me. I give you my blood, my strength, my eternity. I promise to honor your humanity even as you take on aspects of my immortality. I promise to love you as you are and as you become." Celeste responded with her own vows, speaking from her heart rather than from any script. "I vow to love you, challenge you, stand with you through whatever comes. I give you my heart, my trust, my future. I promise to grow with you instead of away from you. I promise to choose you every day we have together." Lucien bit his own wrist then, vampire fangs sharp enough to pierce his ancient skin, and offered it to her. She hesitated for only a heartbeat before pressing her mouth to the wound and drinking. His blood was strange on her tongue, metallic and cold but not unpleasant, tasting of iron and earth and something else she could not name. Power flooded through her like lightning in her veins, foreign yet somehow familiar, like coming home to a place she had never been. Lucien's emotions washed over her in a wave that nearly knocked her off her feet. Love so fierce it burned, fear that she would regret this choice, hope that they would have centuries together, possessiveness that wanted to keep her safe and close, devotion that would burn down kingdoms for her. She gasped at the intensity of it, overwhelmed by feeling so much at once. From Lucien's perspective, he felt her too, felt her determination like steel wrapped in silk, her courage that had carried her through orphanage and darkness and castle politics, her lingering doubt that she was making the right choice, her overwhelming love for him and Astor that eclipsed everything else. It was intoxicating, this connection, more intimate than any physical joining they had shared. He steadied her as the bond settled into place, wrapping his arms around her as her body adjusted to the foreign magic now flowing through her veins. "I have got you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have got you. You are safe." The aftermath hit Celeste like a wave, exhaustion crashing over her as her body worked to integrate the changes happening on a cellular level. Lucian caught her before she could fall, lifted her easily despite her dead weight, carried her to their bed and settled her under blankets that suddenly felt impossibly soft against her sensitized skin. The bond would take weeks to fully integrate, he explained as he sat beside her and stroked her hair. She would be more sensitive to sunlight, not harmed but uncomfortable after more than a few hours of exposure. She would heal faster from injuries that would have taken weeks to mend. She would live longer, aging 1 year for every 10 that passed. But she would still be herself, still mortal enough to eat and sleep and exist in daylight, still Celeste in all the ways that mattered. Days passed in a haze of adjustment as her body rebuilt itself on a fundamental level. Celeste slept more than usual, her body demanding rest as it changed. And when she finally woke fully, she discovered that everything was sharper than before. Sounds she had learned to navigate by had new depth and texture, voices carrying undertones she had never noticed, footsteps revealing weight and mood and intention. The air itself felt different against her skin, rich with information she was learning to process. Even her sense of smell had intensified, the castle becoming a symphony of scents that told her who had passed through each corridor and when. Lucian was beside her when she woke, patient and watchful as he had been for days. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I drank lightning," she said, and he laughed because it was perfectly accurate. She tested the bond experimentally, thinking of him strongly and specifically, and watched him flinch as if struck. "What was that?" he asked, hand going to his chest. "You," she said. "In my head. I can feel you there like a presence just behind my thoughts." She grinned, delighted by this new ability despite his obvious discomfort. "This is going to be interesting," she said. "Terrifying," Lucien corrected, but he was smiling too because the vulnerability went both ways, and after 400 years of control, he found he did not mind being known so completely. They lay together in the quiet afternoon, her head on his chest, where a mortal heart would beat. She could not hear a heartbeat because he had none, dead for centuries, but she felt his presence in her mind now, steady and strong and eternal like a lighthouse in fog. "No regrets?" he asked, needing to hear her say it. "Not one," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. This was right, this choice, this love, this future stretching out before them like a road with no visible end. Whatever came next, they would face it together, always together, and that was worth everything. 1 year after the blood bond, Celeste was thriving in ways that still surprised her when she stopped to consider how far she had come from the orphanage girl who arrived at the castle gates with nothing but courage and a song. The bond had stabilized completely, settling into her bones and blood until it felt as natural as breathing. And she was stronger now, faster, more confident in her movements through the world. Her blindness remained unchanged because magic could not restore what had never developed. But her other senses had sharpened to supernatural levels that made navigation effortless. She knew every corner of the castle now, every corridor and chamber, could identify people by their footsteps and breathing patterns before they spoke, moved through the darkness that was her constant companion with a grace that made others forget she could not see. Her work had expanded beyond what she initially imagined possible when she first proposed reforms to a skeptical court. She had established mortal vampire councils in every major city where representatives from both communities met monthly to resolve disputes and coordinate governance, ensuring that both voices were heard in decisions that affected their lives. She had reformed the blood servant system entirely, making it volunteer only with strict contracts and generous pay so that mortals chose to serve rather than being coerced by poverty or desperation. She had opened 3 new orphanages with plans for more, each one staffed by people who understood that children needed love as much as food and shelter. The kingdom was changing slowly but visibly, the old hierarchies of fear and domination giving way to something more balanced. Mortals no longer cowered when vampires passed in the streets. Vampires no longer dominated through casual cruelty or assumed superiority. It was not perfect, and never would be, because centuries of mistrust could not be erased in a few years, but it was better, and better was enough for now. Aster was 7 now, and thriving in ways that vindicated every decision Celeste had made. He trained with swords according to vampire tradition, his hybrid strength making him formidable even against adult opponents who had centuries of experience. He read philosophy and history according to mortal tradition, his quick mind devouring texts that most children his age would find incomprehensible. He called Celeste Mama without hesitation or qualifier, the word falling from his lips as naturally as breathing. And she loved him fiercely and wholly, this child who was not hers by blood, but was absolutely hers by choice and years of daily devotion. Lucien had changed too in ways both subtle and profound that transformed the atmosphere of the entire court. He was softer now, more open with his emotions, quicker to laugh and slower to anger than he had been in the centuries before Celeste arrived. The icy control that had defined him for so long had thawed, revealing warmth underneath that he had forgotten he possessed. The court had adjusted to these changes, those who could not accept Celeste or her reforms quietly departing for other territories where tradition still reigned supreme. Those who stayed were loyal, having proven themselves through years of service and genuine support for the new order. Valen remained because he was ambitious, but pragmatic enough to recognize that opposing Celeste was political suicide and that her reforms actually strengthened the kingdom. Gregor was aging gracefully as vampires did, looking only slightly older than when Celeste first arrived, still serving as advisor and friend. New younger vampires joined the council, ones who saw Celeste's reforms as progress rather than threat, who had grown tired of the old ways and welcomed change. Dinner in the private dining room had become Celeste's favorite time of day, a moment when the weight of governance and reform fell away, and they were simply a family. Aster told a story about sparring practice that day, describing how he had finally managed to disarm his instructor through a move he had invented himself. Lucien teased him gently about getting overconfident, reminding him that pride came before a fall, but his voice was warm with affection and pride. Celeste listened with a smile on her face, her enhanced hearing catching every nuance of emotion in their voices, and thought that this was happiness, not the dramatic, passionate intensity of their early days, but something quieter and deeper, the contentment of daily life shared with people you loved. She reflected sometimes on the girl who had arrived at the castle gates 3 years ago, frightened but determined, brave but small, with nothing but a song and desperation driving her forward. That girl had been told repeatedly that she could not succeed, that a blind mortal had no place in vampire politics, that she would fail or be destroyed or lose herself in the attempt. Now she was royal consort, a mother in every way that mattered, a reformer whose changes were reshaping the kingdom for generations to come. And she had done it all while blind, while mortal at least mostly, while being told at every turn that it was impossible. The impossibility of it still amazed her some days when she stopped to think about it. That night they walked in the garden as had become their habit, the cool air pleasant against Celeste's skin and the scent of night-blooming flowers filling her senses. She asked Lucien a question that had been on her mind for weeks, needing to voice it before it festered. "Do you ever miss Isadora?" she asked. It was an honest question without jealousy or accusation, simply wanting to understand the man she had bound herself to for centuries. He considered for a long moment before answering, and she felt through the bond that he was choosing his words carefully. "I miss who I was with her," he said finally. "The younger version of myself, who believed love would last forever, and that grief could be avoided through careful planning. But I do not wish you were her. You are entirely yourself, and that is what I love. You are my second chance, my proof that love is not finite, that the heart can heal and love again without diminishing what came before." Celeste felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I think she would approve," she said, "of us, of what we have built, of Aster and the changes we are making." Lucien was quiet for a moment before responding. "I think so too," he said softly. "She wanted the kingdom to be better. She would be proud of what you have accomplished." They sat by the fountain where they had spent so many evenings, Aster asleep upstairs in his bed with toy soldiers scattered around him, the castle peaceful in the way it only was late at night when the daily business of governance had ended. Celeste hummed the Queen's Mercy, the lullaby that had saved her life and brought her to this place, and Lucien joined in because he knew the words now, had learned them over months of hearing her sing to Aster. Together they honored the past while living fully in the present, acknowledging what came before while building something new. It was enough, more than enough, a life rich with purpose and love, and the satisfaction of meaningful work. 20 years later, Celeste stood in the great hall holding a baby, her great-granddaughter biologically, though the child was hers emotionally, in the way all the children in her life became hers, through love rather than blood. She was 40 years old now, but looked 30, thanks to the blood bond that slowed her aging to 1 year for every 10 that passed. And she would age to look 50 over the next century, while Lucien remained unchanged beside her. Aster was 27 and ruling as crown prince with wisdom and compassion that made her proud every single day, having learned from both vampire and mortal traditions to create a leadership style that honored both. He had married a mortal woman in a ceremony that echoed his father's choices, but with better outcomes. A love match between equals who respected each other's differences. They had named their daughter Isadora after the grandmother she would never meet, a gesture that honored the past while looking toward the future. The christening had been a grand affair with the entire court attending to witness the presentation of the newest member of the royal family. Celeste had held baby Isadora with experienced hands, marveling at this tiny life that represented hope and continuity and the success of everything they had built. Aster's wife had asked if Celeste would teach the baby the lullaby when she was old enough, and Celeste had smiled and said, of course, already imagining singing to another generation. That night in the nursery, Celeste sang the Queen's Mercy to baby Isadora, her voice still clear and strong despite the years, while Aster and his wife listened from chairs nearby. Lucien stood in the doorway watching, his expression soft, with an emotion he could not name, and thought about how this song had connected 3 generations now, a thread of melody binding them together across time and loss and triumph. Isadora. The first would be proud of this, of her son finding love again, of her grandson growing into a wise leader, of this new Isadora, who would grow up in a kingdom where mortals and vampires lived in peace. Later, Celeste stood on the balcony looking out over the kingdom she could not see, but could feel in every other sense. She felt the life and energy and hope radiating from the city below, heard the sounds of people living without fear, smelled the prosperity in the air. She had built this with Lucien and Aster and countless others who believed change was possible. built it through stubborn determination and refusal to accept that things had to remain as they had always been. Lucian joined her on the balcony, wrapping an arm around her waist in a gesture as familiar as breathing after decades together. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am grateful," she said, "for all of it, the pain and the fear and the love. Everything that happened made me who I am, shaped me into someone strong enough to stand here and look back without regret." He pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. "You made yourself who you are," he said. "I just got lucky enough to witness it, to walk beside you while you transformed yourself and the kingdom." They stood together on the balcony, immortal mostly and mortal partly, king and consort, partners and lovers, two people who had found each other across impossible odds and built something lasting. Behind them, the castle glowed with warmth from lit windows, the sound of a baby crying and being soothed drifting up from the nursery. Inside, a new generation was beginning, children who would grow up in a better world than their parents had known. And somewhere in whatever comes after death, in whatever realm souls go when their time ends, two queens smiled, one who had died in grief and one who had lived to see joy return. In a castle that once knew only grief, a blind girl's song had brought light back to the dark, and that light would never go out.